I knew something was wrong the moment Alexander leaned back in the conference chair and smiled. Not the kind smile I'd seen during our first pitch meeting 3 years ago. This one had edges. Sharp ones. "Natalia," he said, folding his hands like a teacher about to correct a child. "Why don't you let the men handle strategy from here? Focus on what you do best." The room went silent. My co-founder Marcus shifted in his seat. Our CFO pretended to study his laptop screen. What I did best. I'd built the framework that made our software valuable. I'd landed our first 10 enterprise clients. I'd designed the revenue model everyone praised. But sure, Alexander, let the men handle it. I didn't argue. Not then. I just nodded slowly, picked up my presentation folder, and excused myself to get coffee. My hands shook as I poured from the carafe in the hallway. 3 years. 3 years of 16-hour days and missed family dinners. 3 years of pitching to rooms full of men who looked past me to Marcus. I'd expected it from strangers, but Alexander had seemed different. He'd written the first check. He'd called my vision extraordinary. Apparently, extraordinary only lasted until he wanted control. I stirred sugar into my coffee and thought about the document sitting in my safe deposit box. The one Alexander had signed without reading carefully. The one his lawyer probably skimmed. When I returned to the conference room, they were already moving forward without me. Alexander was walking Marcus through a restructuring plan. New org chart, new reporting lines, new decision-making authority. My role had shrunk to product liaison. I sat down quietly. Nobody looked at me. They were too busy nodding along to Alexander's vision of efficiency and streamlined leadership. Streamlined meant fewer women in the room. I'd seen this pattern before at my last company. The slow squeeze. The gradual erasure. First your title changes. Then your access disappears. Then one day you're gone, and they're telling people you weren't a culture fit. Not this time. Not with what I knew. That evening, I drove to the bank before it closed. The security box felt heavier than usual as I carried it to the private viewing room. Inside was the original investment agreement. 27 pages of legal language. Most of it standard, but tucked into Section 14, subsection C, was the clause my lawyer had insisted on. The one Alexander's team had waved away as just protective boilerplate. It read, "In the event the primary founder is removed from strategic decision-making authority or materially reduced in role without cause, investor shares shall be subject to mandatory repurchase at original purchase price within 30 days of written notice." I took a photo of the page. Then another of the signature line. Alexander's looping scrawl stared back at me. I didn't tell Marcus. Not yet. He'd been my friend since college, but lately he'd been different. Quieter when Alexander spoke. Quicker to agree. Maybe he was tired of fighting. Maybe he liked being called a leader without me beside him. Either way, I needed to be certain before I moved. That night, I reviewed every email from the past 6 months. I documented every meeting where my ideas were reframed as Marcus's. Every client when attributed to the team instead of my pitch. Every strategic memo I'd written that Alexander had forwarded with his own name at the top. By midnight, I had a file thick enough to prove what was happening. And more importantly, why it mattered legally. The next board meeting was scheduled for Friday. Alexander wanted quarterly reviews, moved to monthly. He wanted veto power over hires. He wanted a new executive layer between me and decision-making. Marcus presented the proposal. I watched from my seat at the end of the table, the spot that used to be at Alexander's right hand. Now I was near the door. Easy to excuse. Easy to forget. Our other board member, Patricia, frowned as Marcus talked. She'd been cautious about Alexander's growing control, but she hadn't said much. When Marcus finished, Alexander turned to me with that same sharp smile. "Any concerns, Natalia? Or are we good to move forward?" I met his eyes. "I need to review the details. Can we vote next week?" Alexander's smile tightened. "I don't think we need a week to see this make sense." Patricia shifted. "Actually, a week seems reasonable for changes this significant." Alexander's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Fine. 1 week. But Natalia, I hope you're not planning to slow things down with unnecessary questions. Unnecessary. That word hung in the air. My questions had always been unnecessary to him. My concerns were overthinking. My hesitations were fear of growth. But my results? Those he celebrated. Those he took credit for. I gathered my folder and stood. I'll have my feedback ready by Monday. I left before anyone could respond. Behind me, I heard Alexander mutter something. Marcus laughed. The sound followed me all the way to my car. Over the weekend, I called my lawyer. His name was Harrison, and he'd handled startup contracts for 20 years. When I explained the situation, he went quiet. Then he said, "You want to trigger the buyback clause?" It wasn't a question. "Can I?" I asked. "You can," he said. "But Natalia, you need to understand what this means. Alexander will fight. He'll claim it doesn't apply. He'll argue you weren't removed from strategy, just reorganized. You need documentation." I told him about my files, the emails, the meeting notes, the org chart with my name pushed to the margins. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, draft a notice. Formal, clean, cite the specific clause and breach. Send it Monday morning before the board meeting. Certified mail and email. Make it impossible to ignore." Monday morning came with rain. I sat in my car outside the office, the envelope on my passenger seat. Inside was the notice Harrison had helped me write. It was 2 pages. The first explained the clause. The second listed every instance where my role had been reduced. Every meeting I'd been excluded from. Every decision made without my input. Every public comment Alexander had made suggesting I wasn't capable of strategic leadership. The final paragraph was simple. Pursuant to Section 14(c) of the investment agreement dated March 2021, I hereby demand mandatory repurchase of all shares held by Alexander J. Whitmore at the original purchase price of $500,000. Payment is due within 30 days of receipt of this notice. I took a breath. Then I walked inside. I sent the email first. Certified mail would take a day, but the email was instant. I copied Patricia, Marcus, and our company counsel. Then I forwarded it to Alexander's personal and business addresses. Within 10 minutes, my phone rang. Alexander. I didn't answer. He called again. Then Marcus called. Then Patricia. I silenced my phone and made coffee in the break room. Through the glass wall, I could see people gathering in the conference room. Confusion on their faces. Marcus pacing. Alexander's assistant rushing toward his office. The energy in the building shifted. You could feel it. Something had broken and everyone knew. I carried my coffee back to my desk and opened my laptop. Work didn't stop just because empires crumbled. The board meeting was supposed to start at 10. By 9:45, Alexander stormed into my office. No knock. No greeting. Just rage. "What the hell is this?" He waved his phone. "You can't be serious." I stayed seated. Calm. "I'm completely serious." "This clause doesn't apply," he snapped. "You're still employed. You're still on the board. Nothing's changed." I opened my folder. Slid the printed timeline across the desk. 17 strategic meetings I was excluded from. 9 client pitches reassigned without explanation. 4 memos I authored that you forwarded under your name. My title hasn't changed, but my authority has. That's material reduction, Alexander. Your lawyer will tell you the same thing. His face went red. "You're making a mistake." I met his eyes. "No. You made the mistake." Alexander left without another word. The board meeting was postponed. Patricia called me an hour later, her voice careful. "Natalia, I want to understand what's happening. Alexander says this is a misunderstanding." I walked her through everything. The pattern, the exclusions, the comments. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sighed. "I believe you. I've seen it happening. I should have said something sooner." That admission settled something in my chest. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Patricia said, "Alexander either pays you the $500,000 or he proves you're wrong. Given what you've documented, I don't think he can prove it. But he'll try.
She paused.
Natalia, are you prepared for this to get ugly? I thought about the past 3 years. The condescension. The erasure. It's already ugly, I said. For 3 days, nothing happened. Alexander didn't call. Marcus avoided me. The office felt like a library where everyone whispered. Then, on Thursday, the company's lawyer requested a meeting. Her name was Diane, and she'd always been fair. We met in a small conference room. She had my notice in front of her. Natalia, she said carefully, Alexander believes this is retaliation. He thinks you're upset about normal organizational evolution. I stayed quiet. She continued. But I've reviewed the timeline you provided, and I've looked at the original investment agreement. Section 14C is clear. If your role was materially reduced without cause, the buyback applies. She tapped her pen against the table. The question is whether a court would agree that your role was reduced. I leaned forward. Diane, I built this company. Now I'm a liaison. How is that not reduced? Diane nodded slowly. I agree with you. But Alexander's arguing semantics. Title versus function. Authority versus activity. She looked at me directly. If this goes to arbitration, you'll win. The documentation is solid. But arbitration takes time. It costs money. Alexander knows that. He's betting you'll back down. I didn't blink. I won't. Then you should know, Diane said. Alexander's exploring options. He's talking to other investors about raising capital to buy you out entirely. Not just return his shares. Buy your shares too. Force you out completely. The words landed like stones. Can he do that? Diane's expression was grim. If the board votes for it, and he has majority support, yes. But Patricia would have to agree. And right now, I don't think she will. Still, the threat hung in the air. Alexander wasn't retreating. He was escalating. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with spreadsheets covering every surface. If Alexander forced a buyout, I needed to know my position. The company was valued at $12 million in the last funding round. I owned 38%. Alexander owned 22% after dilution. Marcus owned 25%. Patricia and smaller angels held the rest. If Alexander convinced Marcus and a few others, he'd have enough to push me out. But my shares weren't just equity. They were voting rights, control over intellectual property decisions, board appointment authority. Alexander couldn't touch those without my signature. I pulled up the shareholder agreement, read it twice, and found something I'd forgotten. A right of first refusal clause. If anyone tried to sell their shares, I had the option to buy them first, at fair market value, which meant if Alexander wanted to exit, I could block him. Friday morning, I sent Diane a short email. Please inform Alexander that if he attempts to force a buyout, I will exercise my right of first refusal on his shares. Additionally, any attempt to remove me from the board without cause will result in immediate legal action for breach of fiduciary duty. I copied Patricia. Within an hour, my phone buzzed. Patricia. Natalia, you're playing hardball. He started it, I said. She laughed, but it was tired. Fair. Look, I'm meeting with Alexander this afternoon. He's furious, but I think he's realizing he can't win this. The buyback clause is airtight. His lawyers told him the same thing Diane told you. My pulse quickened. So, what's he going to do? Patricia hesitated. He'll probably pay. But he'll want something in return. A public statement. A quiet exit. Some way to save face. I stared out my office window. He humiliated me for months. Now, he wants me to protect his reputation. Patricia's voice softened. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying it's reality. Alexander has ego. If you back him into a corner with no exit, he'll burn everything down just to hurt you. I closed my eyes, thought about the team, the employees who depended on this company, the clients who trusted us. Was my pride worth their jobs? What kind of statement? I asked finally. Something neutral, Patricia said. Mutual decision. Different visions. No blame. It tasted like ash. But I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it to reclaim my company. I'll agree to a neutral statement if Alexander pays the full buyback, relinquishes his board seat, and signs a non-disparagement agreement. He doesn't get to trash me after he leaves. Patricia was quiet. Then, I'll tell him. The line went dead. The weekend was endless. I tried to distract myself with work, with errands, with anything. But my mind kept circling back. What if Alexander refused? What if this dragged into court? What if I'd miscalculated? Sunday night, Marcus finally called.
His voice was strained.
Natalia, can we talk? I met him at a coffee shop near the office. He looked exhausted. We sat outside despite the cold. Alexander's paying, Marcus said, without preamble. He agreed to your terms. Relief flooded through me, but I kept my face neutral. And you? Where do you stand? Marcus stared at his cup. I should have stood with you sooner. I got caught up in Alexander's vision. He made it seem like growth meant structure, and structure meant hierarchy. I didn't realize he was pushing you out until it was obvious. His honesty surprised me. Do you want me gone? I asked. Marcus looked up sharply.
No. God, no.
Natalia, you're the reason this company exists. I've just been a coward about saying it out loud. We talked for an hour. About the company. About what came next. Marcus admitted he'd felt intimidated by Alexander's confidence. That he'd let himself be managed instead of leading. I want to fix this, he said. If you'll let me. I didn't answer right away. Trust wasn't a switch. But Marcus had been my friend long before he was my co-founder. We'll see, I said finally. Actions, not words. He nodded. Fair. When I got home, there was an email from Diane. Alexander had signed the agreement. The buyback payment would process within 3 business days. His board seat would be vacated immediately. The non-disparagement clause was ironclad. It was over. I sat in the dark of my living room and felt the weight lift. Not all of it, but enough. The press release went out Tuesday morning. After careful consideration, investor Alexander Whitmore and the board of directors have mutually agreed to part ways. We're grateful for his early support and wish him continued success.
Bland.
Polite. Toothless. Exactly what we'd agreed on. Internally, the reaction was different. People knew something had happened. Rumors flew. But Patricia and I held a company meeting that afternoon. We didn't explain everything, just enough. Leadership changes. Renewed focus. Commitment to the team. I stood at the front of the room and felt people watching me differently. Not as the woman who used to matter. As the woman who still did. After the meeting, our lead engineer approached me. Her name was Yuki. I'm glad you're still here, she said quietly. Some of us were worried. I smiled. I'm not going anywhere. The money hit my account on Thursday. $500,000. Exactly what Alexander had invested 3 years ago. No interest. No appreciation. He'd bet on control and lost everything. I didn't celebrate. I transferred the funds into the company's operating account and sent a memo to Patricia and Marcus, reinvesting Alexander's buyback into product development and team expansion. Propose we use this to double our engineering capacity and expand into 2 new markets. Patricia replied within minutes. Approved. Let's schedule a strategy session. And Natalia? Let it. Those 2 words meant more than the money. I opened my calendar and blocked off time. Real strategy. Not liaison work. Not the margins. The center. Where I'd always belonged. Over the next month, things shifted. Marcus and I rebuilt our partnership. He handled operations and partnerships. I focused on product and growth strategy. Patricia became more active, checking in weekly. We hired 4 new engineers. Landed 2 major clients. Started planning an expansion into healthcare software. Alexander's name stopped coming up. His absence left space for people to breathe. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note on my desk. It was from Diane, the company lawyer. You handled that with more grace than most people would have. Don't lose that strength. I tucked it into my desk drawer. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Strength wasn't loud. It was knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And sometimes it was knowing how to fight so well that walking away wasn't necessary. 3 months after Alexander left, we closed a new funding round. This time, I controlled the process. I chose the investors. I negotiated the terms. And I made damn sure every agreement had the same protective clauses. No more handshake deals. No more assumptions. We brought in 2 investors, both women who'd built companies themselves. They understood what it meant to fight for your seat. At the closing dinner, one of them raised her glass. To Natalia. For building something worth protecting. Patricia smiled. Marcus nodded. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not vindication.
Not victory.
Just clarity. I'd built this. I'd protected it. And I'd proven that letting the men handle strategy was never the only option. It wasn't even the best one. 6 months later, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Lesson learned." I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. Inside was a short message from Alexander. "You were right. I underestimated you. For what it's worth, I see that now." No apology. No acknowledgement of the harm. Just an admission stripped of responsibility. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply. To explain what he'd taken from me. The confidence. The months of second-guessing. The exhaustion of fighting to be seen. But another part knew it didn't matter. Alexander's understanding wouldn't undo the past. And I didn't need his validation anymore. I closed the email. Didn't respond.
Moved on.
Some people don't deserve your closure. They just deserve your silence. A year after I triggered the buyback clause, the company hit $15 million in revenue. We expanded into 3 new markets. Our team grew to 45 people. And my title finally matched my role, Chief Executive Officer. Marcus became COO. Patricia stayed on the board. We worked as partners, not passengers. I kept the original investment agreement in my office, framed behind my desk. Not as a warning, as a reminder. The fine print matters. The details matter. And when someone tells you to step aside, sometimes the strongest move is to make them step back instead. Alexander learned that the hard way. I learned something too. Power doesn't come from being louder or taking up more space. It comes from knowing your worth, protecting your work, and never letting anyone convince you that strategy is something you're not qualified to handle. Especially when you're the one who built the whole damn strategy in the first place.